Yo, what's up music lovers? Welcome to Retro Rhythm with another episode of Hidden Tracks, where we dive deep into the grooves of music history. Today we're spinning the tale of a man whose fingers danced on the strings, influencing legends, yet his name remains a whisper in the annals of rock history. Ladies and gentlemen, let's journey into the life of Wizz Jones, the British folk guitarist who lit the fuse for the explosion of rock in the 60s and beyond. The early strums. All right, beautiful people, grab your leather satchels and put a brew on, because we're winding the tape back to a time when British youth were strumming out dreams on borrowed guitars and folk rhythm was still catching its breath. The year was 1969, April 25 to be precise, and while the world was on the brink of upheaval, in a quiet corner of Thornton Heath, Surrey, a new rhythm was beginning its long journey. A young man named Raymond Ronald Jones, though the world would come to know him simply as Wizz, came into the world. Now, this wasn't just any birth in the suburbs. No, this was the arrival of one of Britain's finest finger-picking troubadours, though nobody knew it yet, not even him. See, Wizz grew up in the kind of post-war Britain where ration books sat on kitchen tables and the wireless hummed with news, comedy and the odd slice of big band jazz. But something deeper stirred in the boy's ears, something not quite British, not quite polite, something raw and wild and full of dusty railroads and broken hearts. That something was the blues. Thanks to a crate of imported 78s and some late night BBC broadcasts, Wizz discovered the weathered voices of American giants, Big Bill Bronzy, Leadbelly and the Rambler himself, Jack Elliott. Their songs scratched and grainy became his teachers. Where others saw static, Wizz heard soul. Where others heard noise, he heard narrative. His fingers began to mimic those rolling delta rhythms, each pluck and pull telling stories of cotton fields, juke joints and old ghost towns under the moonlight. But by his mid-teens, Wizz wasn't just listening, he was living it. He got his first guitar second-hand and string bent, but filled with promise, and taught himself to coax melodies from the wire and the wood. No formal lessons, just a hunger to play and a need to translate those foreign sounds into his own tongue. It was all ears and instinct. He practiced for hours in the kitchen, in the bathroom, in the bedroom, in the garden, wherever he could escape, and those hours added up, catapulting from the bedroom strummer to the budding street corner bard. Now picture this. It's 1957 and London's grey streets are starting to echo with something new. The war was over, skiffle was sweeping the youth like a bonfire in a dry field, and a teenage Wizz was right there at the centre of it all. Guitar strung over his shoulder and a head full of Guthrie and a heart full of Bronzy. He formed his first band, the Wranglers, a skiffle group in the name, but with the spirit that couldn't be boxed in. Think washboards, T-chest bass, and the raw twang of acoustic strings meeting railroad rhythms. They played wherever they could, school dances, youth clubs, upstairs pubs with sweat on the walls and Guinness in the air. But it wasn't just about the notes, it was about the energy. Wizz playing had a magic to it. Even then, a blend of ragtime's bounce and folk's melancholy. Audiences didn't just tap their feet, they really listened. Something was about the way he told a story with his fingertips, the way his thumb kept time like an old train chugging through Kentucky hills. It stuck with people. You could say it was the birth of his signature sound, unpolished but pure, humble but hypnotic. Even back then, the name Wizz had begun to stick, a nickname from school days thanks to a motorcycle accident that gave him a bit of a local legend, but one that suited his guitar style just fine. Fast, fluid, and with a spark of danger, he whizzed across those strings with a speed that made folks stop and made a midpoint. But this chapter isn't about his fingers, it's about where they led him. Those early gigs opened doors to late night sessions at Les Cousins' impromptu jam circles in Soho, and folk dens where men and women twice his age nodded in quiet approval. He was the new blood, yet he carried the weight of centuries' tradition in his calluses. Wizz's early days weren't filled with fame or fortune, but something much more precious: respect. He'd earned the attention of peers and pioneers, of aging bluesmen and rising folk voices. Every chord he struck was another stone laid on the path that would soon take him far beyond Thornton Heath, beyond skiffle, beyond trend. He was becoming not just a player of songs, but a custodian of them, a bridge between cultures and generations, a British boy who could fingerpick like a Delta drifter, sing like he'd walk the Dust Bowl, and yet remain unmistakably himself. So the scene was set. The early strums had laid the foundation. Wizz wasn't just playing songs, he was crafting a voice, and in a smoky, rain-drenched London, that voice was about to find its place. Stick around, friends. We're just getting started, and the next chapter will follow Wizz from the cafe corners of Soho to folk clubs of Europe, where his sound would take root and blossom across a continent. But for now, rewind the reel and let those early strums echo one more time. Chapter 2, The Beatnik Wanderer. All right, folks, grab your rucksack and passport, because we're taking this train off the rails and into the wild unknown. When we last left our young man, Wizz, he was cutting his teeth on the strings of skiffle and soaking up the soul of American blues right in the heart of London. But Wizz wasn't one to stay in one place. No, sir. That cat had the spirit of a wanderer, more karaoke than Kingston, more Diango than Downing Street. You see, Wizz Jones wasn't just a musician, he was a true beatnik, a pilgrim with a six-string, a seeker with a thumb out and a rucksack slung over his shoulder. And in the late 50s and early 60s, when most folks were chasing steady jobs or settling down, Wizz did what the old folk heroes did. He hit the road. Now, this isn't no postcard story. This is real deal, busking, border crossing, sleeping under the stars kind of living. Paris, Rome, Munich, Stockholm, wherever the wind blew and the coins clinked, Wizz followed. He wasn't just looking for gigs, he was looking for sound, for truth, for the raw, unfiltered musical poetry buried beneath the back streets, hostel bunks and cafe corners. He was chasing the ghost of Woody Guthrie, except this time with a British passport and a head full of lead belly. Picture it, the left bank of Paris, the smell of croissants in the air, a philosopher arguing politics by the Seine, a painter washing out his brushes in cheap wine, and there on the street corner, Wizz Jones sitting cross-legged with his battered guitar case open and his fingers weaving stories into melody. Folks dropped Frank's Shaw, but more than that, they paused, because here was something real, something that didn't need translation. It wasn't long before this wandering barb started brushing shoulders with kindred spirits, artists who, like him, were trying to forge new identities out of old traditions. He jammed in cafes with gypsy rhythm players, traded chords with Spanish flamenco street performers, and stoked in the rhythm of every alleyway he could. You could say his finger picking, his guitar picked up a passport stamp in each city, each note marked with its own cultural accent. Now, let's drop some names, because yes, Wizz was rubbing elbows with future icons before they were stars. He mingled with a young Rod Stewart before the Rooster Hair, before the stadium tours. They were just two kids with guitars trying to scrape enough coin for the next train ticket or bowl of soup. And then there was Ralph McTell, who would later write the classic Streets of London. He and Wizz shared more than a few of those streets, sleeping rough, playing for change and dreaming of stages. These weren't casual meetings, folks. These were formative bonds, a loose tribe of musical souls drawn together, not by fame, but by the fire of the folk movement that was spreading like wildfire across Europe. They shared more than songs, they shared philosophies that music wasn't just entertainment, it was resistance, it was connection, it was life, and Wizz, he absorbed it all. Each city added a new flavour to his guitar style, from synchronated bounce of Parisian swing to moody droning of northern folk. He stitched together a sound that was uniquely his own, a little ragtime, a little blues, a dash of flamenco, and a whole lot of soul. It wasn't flashy, it was honest. Every phrase he played had the wear and tear of the road baked into it. And don't let the quiet smile fool you. Wizz had grit. He busked in the rain, he played through frozen fingers, he sang over shouting crowds and the clatter of train stations, and hustled for bread and played for beer. He'd never lost the joy the moment his fingers hit those strings. Everything else, cold, hunger, exhaustion, just melted away, because that's what the road gave him, not just hard-earned skill, but purpose. His guitar wasn't just an instrument, it was his map, his voice, his anchor. By the early 60s, Wizz had become something of a myth in folk underground. He'd show up unannounced at folk clubs in Germany, wow the crowd with a set of American blues and Celtic ballads, and then disappear into the night like some sort of musical phantom. And every time he reappeared, his playing had matured, deeper, more layered, more alive. He wasn't intimidating. He wasn't imitating anybody. He was invigorating. And all the while he stayed humble, never chasing the spotlight, never compromising the sound. While others courted record labels and commercial success, Wizz stayed true to his roots. He wasn't interested in shiny suits or chart positions. He was after something deeper, the old magic that made people stop, listen and feel. And if you're wondering where all that wandering got him, well, it brought him home. Not just to the UK, but to a voice, a true voice, one that was grounded in tradition but free to roam. He returned not as a somewhat lost vagabond, but as a seasoned artist with a pocket full of songs and a heart full of stories. So when you hear Wizz's early recordings like his self-titled debut in 1969, what you're hearing is Europe. You're hearing train stations, coffee shops, dusty bedsits, rainy boulevards, laughter, heartbreak, hunger and discovery. You're hearing the road, but not just the miles, the meaning. Vinyl crackle rises and then softens again as music revibe carries. So that, my friends, is the journey of the beatnik wanderer, a young man who traded comfort for creativity, home for harmony, and came back richer than any banker could imagine. No manager, no PR team, just a guitar and the need to connect. Next up, we'll take you to the golden years, the recording studios, the live gigs and the albums that would solidify Wizz's place in the pantheon of folk legends. But never forget this chapter, because before the spotlight there was streetlight, and under that streetlight stood a boy named Wizz playing his truth into the night. Stick around, the needles only just hit the groove. Chapter 3, the guitarist. All right, cool cats and connoisseurs of the fretboard finesse. If you're stuck with me so far, then pour yourself a cuppa or something stronger, because this chapter's where we really strike gold. Now listen, Wizz Jones was never in it for fame. He didn't court cameras, he didn't pose for the press, he didn't need to, because while some folks chase the limelight, others become a light for others who do. And Wizz, he lit the path for a whole generation of guitar slinging dreamers. Let's lay it out plain. Wizz Jones is the guitarist, a quiet legend, a humble architect of sound, and while his name might not have headlined the charts, it echoed through the corridors of rock, royalty. Take this. A teenage Keith Richards, before the Stones had even rolled into gear, was skipping out of our school in Sidcup to go and watch Wizz play, not once, not twice, but religiously. And when Keith talks about those early days, he doesn't mention the suits or the swagger. He talks about Wizz, about those hands, about how Wizz could make a single guitar sound like a full band, rhythm and lead dancing together like smoke and fire. Then there's Eric Clapton, yes, slow hand himself, the man who could bend a note like a prayer. Even he admitted to stealing licks from Wizz, imitating him, and even if you got Clapton saying he tried to catch up with you, well, you already lapped half the field. And how about Bert Jansch, the legendary bard of Pentangle, the Scottish six-string sorcerer? When Bert was asked who really shaped the scene, he didn't hesitate. He called Wizz the most underrated guitarist ever. Think about it. Not good, not talented, but the most underrated coming from Bert. That's not just praise, that's canon lore. But let's zoom in on why Wizz earned the reverence. First, the finger picking. Oh man, Wizz didn't just play guitar, he wove with it. His right hand moved like a loom, bass lines thumping with his thumb, melodies dancing on top with delicate precision, harmonics ringing like wind chimes on a summer breeze. It was effortless and intricate, grounded in the folk blues of American South, but spoken in his own tongue. He could shift from cascading ragtime rhythms of Mississippi, John Hurt, to the open tune mysteries of Davy Graham, and still sound unmistakably Wizz. He didn't just master styles, he melded them, built his own language from him. That's the mark of a true innovator, not imitation but translation. And it wasn't just the technique, it was the tone, warm, woody, worn in an old jacket that fits just right. You didn't just hear Wizz play, you felt it like someone telling you a secret they've kept too long. It was music that whispered as much as it sang. And now, keep in mind, this was happening in smoky folk clubs and kitchen jam sessions, not on national television. Wizz could have filled halls, but he preferred corners, intimate rooms, shared moments. He didn't climb onto stage, he invited you onto the floor. That's why the musicians noticed him, before the magazines ever did. And those musicians, they carried Wizz's influence like a quiet badge of honor. It was never flashy, never boastful, but it was there, hidden in phrasing of Fairpoint Convention ballad, echoing in the intro of a Zeppelin acoustic break, reflected in the raw honesty of Nick Drake's picking. All of them walked through doors Wizz had quietly opened. Let's talk about some of those recordings. Wizz's 1969 debut album, self-titled and criminally underappreciated at the time, was the blueprint. Sparse, soulful, sincere, every track soaked in travel, tradition and time. No studio trickery, just man and guitar. You could hear the road in those tracks, the miles, the cold mornings, the laughter, the heartbreak, and yet it's not melancholic. It's alive, lived in. Later albums like When I Leave Berlin or Magical Flight carried the same DNA. Clean production, yes, but still centered on the same thing, authenticity. That was Wizz's compass. He never followed trends, he followed the song, and in doing so he created a body of work that aged like a fine red in a dusty cellar, subtle, rich and full of fire. And here's the kicker. Wizz was never just a solo artist. He collaborated, he lifted others up, played with Clive Palmer, Bert and John Renbourn, and his own son, Simeon Jones, and his work with Simeon up that father-son connection. It wasn't just generation, it was spiritual. The legacy of tradition passing gently from hand to hand, from fret to fret. And yet despite all this respect from legends, Wizz never changed, never traded his old battered acoustic for a flashy electric, never chased a limelight. And in an industry spinning faster by the minute, Wizz stayed grounded. While others roared into arenas, he stayed seated on stools in clubs, in garden gigs and European cafes, quietly enchanting anybody who cared to really listen. Now that, dear listener, is power, because there is a kind of legacy that doesn't need billboards, that doesn't need platinum records or tabloid headlines. It's the kind that lives in the hands of others, in the notes that ripple through someone else's solo, in the pause before a verse, where silence says more than sound. That's Wizz. Needle hiss slightly mellow, fingerstyle fades and in beneath. So if you ever find yourself with old Wizz record, be it vinyl, CD or streaming through some digital cloud, don't just play it, sit with it, let it breathe, let the guitar do the talking, and remember that you're not just hearing one man, you're hearing all the men and women he inspired, and the roots of a movement that valued story over speed, soul over spectacle. That's the beauty of a guitarist. They don't need to raise their voice because the echoes speak loud enough. Coming up next, chapter 4, where Wizz steps into the role of elder statesman, collaborating, mentoring, and continuing to surprise even as the decades roll by. The hair gets grayer, the clubs get smaller, but the music gets deeper. Stay tuned, lovers of song. We're nowhere near done yet. Chapter 4, The Reluctant Star. Now friends, let's ease into the next chapter like sliding into a worn leather chair, the kind that creaks in all the right places. We've journeyed with Wizz through smoky basements, European street corners and backroom sessions with legend, but now it's time to talk about what made him more than just a brilliant guitarist. It's what didn't happen to Wizz Jones that made him the artist we still revere today. They called him a legend, a pioneer, a forefather of British folk revival. And what did Wizz say to all that? He just chuckled, looked down at his well-worn fretboard and said, "Lucky I was never famous enough to become an alcoholic." That's Wizz in a sentence. A humble truth teller, a man with a quiet wit and a deep soul, and an absolutely zero time for trappings of ego. Fame, that wasn't something, that was someone else's road. The spotlight, it made him squint. Wizz wasn't chasing charts, he was chasing chords. You see, while others rode the wave of commercial success, scoring record deals and chasing record and TV spots, Wizz stayed planted, rooted like an old oak in the folk forest. And not because he couldn't have made it big, he chose to keep it small, intimate, real, because for Wizz, the music was never about reaching millions. It was about reaching one listener, one moment, one room full of folks who actually heard him. And that, my friend, takes courage. Let's talk albums. In 1973, Wizz dropped a little LP called When I Leave Berlin, and let me tell you, that record is the definition of a cult classic. No flashy production, no marketing blitz, just honest to goodness soul scraped songs delivered with his signature warmth and grace. The title track, a gentle lament that floats like the morning mist over a canal. A song that Bruce Springsteen himself would later cover during a show in Berlin. Yep, the boss tipped his hat to our Wizz. That's how far the ripples go, quiet influence echoing across oceans and decades. And yet back when it was first released, when I Leave Berlin didn't break into the mainstream, it didn't need to. It nestled its way into the hearts of folk diehards, crate diggers and late night radio hosts who knew how to spot gold hiding in plain sight. Wizz's disdain for commercialism wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. He once remarked that being too well known might have derailed him, might have stolen the joy. You get the sense that Wizz knew something, like the industry had forgotten, that music Real music is about connection, not conquest. He never bought into the illusion of that bigger meant better. He didn't need a limo when he had a second-hand class ticket and a notebook full of verses. He didn't want adoration when he could have authenticity. For Wizz, a pub gig with 30 people leaning in close was worth more than a stadium full of distracted applause. And that humility, it showed in every part of his life. He lived modestly, carried his own gear, tuned his guitar himself, showed up on time, played his set, then stuck around to talk with the audience. No entourage, no diva demands, just a bloke with guitar, grateful share the evening. And here's the kicker, the beautiful twist. By not chasing stardom, Wizz earned a different kind of legacy, a pure one, the kind of legacy that musicians whisper about in the green rooms, the kind that earns nods of respect from every guitarist who ever tried to match his thumb independence, that kind that gets reissued by labels like Earth Records years after the fact because the music still matters. See, Wizz didn't need to be the face on a billboard. He was the guy whose name got passed around like a secret. You got to hear Wizz Jones, trust me. And while he kept playing decades after decades, the world started catching up slowly, quietly. Old recordings resurfaced, new fans discovered him through bootlegs, borrowed LPs and word of mouth reverence, and he became the quiet elder statesman of a scene he helped build. Let's not forget that Wizz didn't just retreat into nostalgia. He kept growing. In his later years, he collaborated with a young artist, welcomed his son Simeon into his recordings and kept exploring musically, dabbling in jazz recordings, storytelling ballads and whatever caught his ear. He was a folk singer, sure, but never just that. Blues, ragtime, country, chasm. Wizz was a sponge absorbing influences but never diluting himself. He respected tradition but he wasn't bound by it, and he passed it on to anyone who would listen. A conversation with Wizz was like opening a door to a forgotten corner of music history. He talked about rambling Jack Elliott one minute, Django Reinhardt the next, and then circle back to someone you never heard of but had to check out. A living archive in denim and boots, and his reluctance became part of the rhythm. That gentle refusal to play the game made people want to play his records. The authenticity, irresistible. In a world full of flash, Wizz was substance. In a culture chasing likes and headlines, he offered craft and nuance and timeless honesty. Cue a soft fade in of a tune from When I Leave Berlin, finger-picking, melodic, resolute. And so do you call someone who avoids what do you call someone who avoids stardom yet becomes the northern star of others? You call him Wizz Jones, the reluctant star, the quiet teacher, the musician's musician, the keeper of flame. And while others burn fast and bright, Wizz smoldered slow, steady and warm, the kind of fire you had huddled around, the kind that lasts. Coming up next, we'll dive into chapter 5, the legacy and the laughter, because if there's one thing Wizz never lost, even after decades on the road, it was that dry wit and twinkle in the eye, love for absurdities of life. So stay with us, fellow travellers. The song's not over yet. Chapter 5, the legacy lives on. All right, friends, let's take a moment, breathe it in. We've walked with Wizz Jones through the smoky folk clubs of Soho, down rain-drenched Parisian streets, past student halls where Keith Richard took notes, and into the small back rooms of the British Isles where greatness went quietly about its business. And now we reach the final verse. But you know what they say, legends don't end, they echo. And in 2012, Berlin, a cold night sky hangs over the city. Olympic Stadion, The crowd's buzzing, waiting for the thunder of a full E Street band kickoff, but instead something softer happens. Out walks Bruce Springsteen, the boss himself, and he does something unexpected. He opens his set with a quiet acoustic number, no fanfare, just him, a guitar, and a song that starts with a line, "When I Leave Berlin." That's right, Wizz's song. It was the kind of moment that chases you off guard and lifts you 2 inches off the ground. Springsteen, an American icon, playing tribute to a British folk troubadour who never chased the spotlight but somehow ended up illuminating rooms all over the world. That moment wasn't just a cover, it was a confirmation Wizz's influence had stretched across decades and continents, quietly weaving itself into the DNA of popular music. And it wasn't just Bruce. The fingerprints of Wizz's playing, his tone, his phrasing, heck, even his spirit showed up in all sorts of unexpected places. You hear it in the melodic storytelling of Ralph McTell, in the intricate finger picking of John Renbourn, in the raw honesty of Nick Drake, in the modern world revivalists who found something ancient and fresh in his phrasing. Artists you'd never expect name him as an influence, not because he's flashy, but because he's real. Wizz's legacy wasn't carved into gold records or award cabinets. It etched into chords, the kind of chords that make your heart swell, the ones played in lonely bedrooms at midnight by kids who just discovered what a Travis picking pattern feel like under their finger. In the reverent whispers in backstage green rooms, you never hear Wizz live. In backstage green rooms, you ever hear Wizz Jones live? Changed my whole approach. You see, what Wizz gave the world wasn't just a catalogue. It was a compass, a way to play, a way to be humble, curious, obsessed with craft, unimpressed by fame, and always faithful to the song. Let's not forget he didn't just influence players, he influenced people. His music was a comfort blanket for the outcast, a roadmap for the road weary, a spark for the wide-eyed, because Wizz had that rare gift. His songs felt like old friends the first time you heard them, and they aged with you, got wiser, more essential, and even as he got older, Wizz never stopped playing, never stopped learning. He kept sharing bills with younger artists, passing the torch without ceremony or ego, always just happy to be in the room, guitar in hand, and still in love with the music. There's a beautiful photograph out there, Wizz well into his 70s, sitting with his son Simeon, both of them with guitars, both smiling. They just discovered the D chord for the first time. That's right there. That's legacy in motion, not dusty, not finished, but alive. Wizz didn't just build something, he nurtured it, passed it on, not as a monument, but as a living thing. Let's talk about the fans. Oh yes, the fans, not millions screaming in arenas, but thousands whispering in record shops. Folks who treasured their old vinyl copies of Magic Flight like heirlooms. People who saw him once in a folk club in 1982 and still talk about it like it was yesterday. Young musicians who learned about Wizz from their guitar teacher or their dad, or that one time a YouTube algorithm struck gold, because Wizz never went away. He just settled into the hearts, into the histories, into the musical vocabulary of anybody who believes that one man and one guitar can still move the earth a little closer to heaven. And even as digital waves washed over the industry, Wizz's sound endures. Reissues, documentaries, tribute concerts all poured water on the roots he laid decades before. And guess what? That tree still grows, new generations discovering his records, covering his songs, learning his licks. His music outlived every trend it ignored, and maybe that's the real magic. Wizz Jones never chased relevance, but reverence found him again and again, because truth never goes out of style, and that's what Wizz always gave us. Truth in song, fade-in warm instrumental, gentle guitar, something you'd imagine playing at sunset. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a legacy not measured in billboards but in moments, in the breath between verses, in the reverent hush before the first chord, in the quiet parade of a songwriter who knows his work. Live long after that will live long after the last encore. It leaves us with a name, Wizz Jones, that's spoken softly and with weight, a name that didn't demand to be remembered, it was just is. And that final note of his journey and as the final notes of his journey ring out, remember Wizz never stopped playing, never stopped sharing, and though he may no longer walk the streets of Thornton Heath or strum in dimly lit folk clubs on rainy nights, his spirit lingers in the melody, in the memory, in the music. So next time you pick up a guitar, slow down, let your fingers wander, play a little softer, listen a little deeper, and somewhere between those strings you just might hear him, the reluctant star, the beatnik wanderer, the guitarist, Wizz. Thanks for listening, friends. Keep the record turning. The legacy lives on. Final notes. All right, my fellow travelers, this is the part of the journey we never wanted to reach. The final song, the last encore. But like all great stories, especially the ones told in minor chords and live between railway platforms and pub stages, it had to land softly, truthfully, and with the kind of grace that Wizz Jones himself carried every single time he picked up a guitar. In April of 2025, Wizz took his final bow. 86 years old, a full life, a quiet giant gone home. There was no flashy headlines, no overproduced tribute shows, no sweeping fanfares with corporate sponsors, just a gentle ripple across the folk and roots community. A series of teary-eyed posts from old bandmates and young fans alike, a few scratched LPs spinning in kitchens across Europe, and one profound, undeniable truth echoing from fretboards everywhere. The man had mattered. See, Wizz Jones didn't pass away like a footnote. He passed like a final verse, poetic, understated, but unforgettable, because his music never needed to be shouted, to be heard, and never did he. Wizz was never a household name. He was completely fine with that. Hell, he might have preferred it. He didn't need fame, spotlight. He lit up rooms, not arenas. But let me tell you something, folks. If you peel back the curtain on the world's most iconic guitarists, the ones who did grab the spotlight, you'll find Wizz's foot fingerprints all over their strings. His influence? Quiet, yes, but everywhere. From the callous thumbs of blues revivalists to the open tune explorations of folk fusion wizards, Wizz's DNA runs like a thread through 6 decades of sound, and while the radio might not have played him daily, as the real musicians always knew, they felt it in his phrasing, heard it in the spaces between the notes, understood it in the way he let songs breathe, and that's what he left behind. Not a brand, not a headline, but a treasure trove. Songs etched into dusty grooves and digital files, bootleg tapes from tiny clubs, handwritten lyric sheets passed from friend to friend, collaboration stretching across generations, from London scuffle days to intimate sets with his son Simeon, carrying on the family flame. And it's not just music, friends, it's the way he played it, with honesty, with humor, with humility. That's the Wizz Jones we remember, the man who said, "Lucky I was never famous enough to become an alcoholic," the man who tuned up in silence the stories through melodies and made you feel like the only person in the room, even if the room was packed. His death didn't mark an end, it marked a transition from living artist to living legend. His records still spin, his videos still play, and maybe more importantly, his songs still teach. Right now, somewhere a teenager sitting cross-legged with an acoustic guitar trying to master Wizz's version of National 7, and he doesn't know the whole story yet, but he will. The music draws you in like that. The more you listen, the more it reveals. Like an old friend who only tells you the deep stuff when you're ready, because that's how Wizz operated. No flash, no fuss, no depth, just depth and generosity. Every note with a handshake, every song a shared secret. Even in his later years, when others slowed down, Wizz stayed curious, still performing, still learning, still joking about missing chords and forgetting lyrics, always with that glint in his eye. He had the heart of a student until the very end, and that's rare, my friends. That's precious. His final shows were masterclasses in subtlety, not perfect, not polished, but real. There'd be laughter, the odd string buzz, a forgotten lyric, and then he would hit a passage that made the whole room hold its breath. Because even in his 80s, when his hands weren't quite as fast and his voice had softened, Wizz could still deliver the truth better than anyone. And now that he's gone, what do we have left? We've got the songs, dozens of albums, official and unofficially released. And When I Leave Berlin to Happiness was free, each one a chapter in the long handwritten novel of his life. We've got the footage, shaky camcorder recordings from folk festivals, rare BBC sessions, a few treasured interviews where you can hear the dry wit and modest chuckle. We've got the stories, every musician who met him seems to have one, about the time he jammed with some unknown player in the back garden, or gave his set list, or just listened, just really listened when they played their first song. And most of all, we've got that legacy, not in bronze plaques or statues, but in the way people play because of him, in the choice to go acoustic, to keep it simple, to make it mean something. Every time a singer leans into the mic and plays that voice just a little slower than the chorus and let it land, that's Wizz. Cue finger-picking reprise and When I Leave Berlin slow and revert. So maybe the final note isn't really final. Maybe it's just the last note in the movement, because Wizz didn't play it to impress, he played it to express. And that, my friends, is the kind of thing that doesn't die. It echoes, it lingers, it teaches, it lives on. So wherever you are tonight, on the bus, in the bar, or sitting quietly with an old Martin guitar, raise a glass, play a tune, share a song for Wizz. Because as long as there's a guitar out there, that's being played with heart. His spirit still walks beside it. Thumb on the bass, fingers on the melody, smile on his face, and with that, we close this chapter. But the story plays on. This program is dedicated to the memory of Wizz Jones, 1939 to 2025, whose hands made stories, whose songs became homes, and whose spirit would forever echo in 6 strings.